Forward TV. The world is thinking.
Good morning and welcome to this first debate of the day. It's a breakfast banter entitled Debating Darwin, Should Evolution Be Taught as the Only Truth? I'll be your chair this morning. My name is Alex Hochuli and I'm the web editor at the Institute of Ideas and a postgrad student at King's College London. Just to give a very brief introduction before I introduce the speakers, this debate of course has a very long pedigree, in particular in America, and especially since the emergence of the modern American Christian fundamentalist movement in the early part of the 20th century. But of course this debate itself has very much evolved over the years, from one where the anti-evolutionists would reject Darwinism altogether to the more sort of relativistic demands today to teach the controversy and the stress on the teaching of intelligent design theory. But what's particularly interesting about this debate with regard to education is that education, of course, proposes a choice of people where it can't be shied away from. There can't be any real ceasefire over it. A decision has to be made as to what is taught in science classes. And while the United States is an important point of reference in this debate, let me just cite a couple of examples just from the past month with regard to the European context and specifically the British one, just to sort of set the scene for this debate. Just at the beginning of October, the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly adopted a resolution urging its 47 members not to cede any ground to the demands to teach creationism in schools. But they didn't just cite issues of education specifically, but actually said that this was that this may have real consequences for our democracies and that the teaching of creationism could be a threat to human rights. So it's pretty grand stuff there. Then later this month in Sweden, the Swedish government cracked down on independent faith schools and their teaching of creationism, saying that they wanted to protect all pupils from all sorts of fundamentalism. And then finally in the UK, at the beginning of the month, the government issued guidelines stating that not that teachers should teach creationism, but should the subject be broached by pupils in class, the subject should be discussed, which of course is a peculiar situation. And then Professor Michael Rice of the Institute of Education implicitly endorsed this view, saying that even if a theory appears to be non-scientific, that shouldn't preclude it from being discussed in school science classes. So that's enough for me, and I'll start introducing the panel in the order in which they'll speak. First, on my far left, is Professor Simon Conway Morris. Simon is Professor of Evolutionary Paleobiology in the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Cambridge. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1990 and has received medals from the National Academy of Sciences and the Geological Society of London. Simon is renowned for his insights into early evolution and his studies of paleobiology, and is author of The Crucible of Creation and, more recently, Life's Solution, Inevitable Humans in a Lonely Universe. Speaking second to my right is Professor Steve Fuller. Steve is Professor of Sociology at the University of Warwick. He's a founder of the research program Social Epistemology, which is the name of the quarterly journal he founded in 1987, as well as his first book, Social Epistemology. Steve's work has appeared in numerous languages and has been a visiting professor in a number of countries. He's a fellow of the RSA and a fellow of the ESRC. Importantly, Steve was an expert witness in the widely reported Dover, Pennsylvania court case over the teaching of creationism in schools back in 2005. He's the author most recently of Science versus Religion, Intelligent Design, and the Problem of Evolution, and of the forthcoming Descent over Descent, Evolution's War on Intelligent Design. And finally, speaking third, just to my immediate left is David Perks. Dave is head of physics at Graveney School in London and has taught in state schools for over 20 years. He was the lead author of the publication What is Science Education For?, which critiqued the new school science curriculum, provoking the front page headline in the Times, Science Elite Rejects New GCSE as Fit for the Pub. David writes more broadly on education and the relationship between science and society. His interests range from environmentalism to, not surprisingly, intelligent design. Dave also originated the Institute of Ideas and Pfizer Debating Matters sixth form debating competition. Okay, so the speakers will have a very, just 3 to 5 minutes to introduce the topic, and then, seeing as this room is so packed, I'll go very quickly out and grab as many questions as we can. So when you're ready, Simon.
If this works, thank you. Good morning. As I say, thank you, Alex, for that. That's got a life of its own. Okay, Pontius Pilate asked what is truth, and some people thought that he was possibly jesting. not everybody, I think, on that occasion. The question, in a way, is evolution true? Well, of course it is, and in fact it's by far the best explanation we have for what we see around us in terms of organic diversity. Some people think there's a huge conspiracy, that somehow it's all been kept under wraps, that there are alternatives. Of course there are alternatives, and if I know the alternative, I'll be going to Stockholm to shake the hand of the King of Sweden and pick up my Nobel Prize. There's a lot going on this at the moment. I won't bore you with all the sorts of examples which support this. I think they're well known to almost everybody here. So, in particular, should we teach alternatives? In particular, should we teach intelligent design? Well, of course we should, in the same way as we should teach our children that the moon is made of green cheese, or alternatively, we say that every time a rabbit wrinkles its nose, a baby is born, which those of you who know Woodhouse will remember he also said, we know this is not true. So from that point of view, no, we certainly shouldn't do that at all. But why don't I like intelligent design, and of course go to the States like many other people? For two reasons. First of all, it is not science of any description at all, but it's also, and I think in certain respects more interestingly, really lousy theology. So if you want to attack intelligent design, that's a weak point. I wouldn't worry about the science, it's non-existent. But we have a problem at the moment, and it was alluded to in the introduction with respect to the creationists and especially the Christian fundamentalists in the United States, and that's absolutely true. But the difficulty is that the entire area has been hijacked by fundamentalists on both sides. There's rather little to choose between them. I need hardly remind you of how they stand. Life itself is extremely simple. Everything which they can explain is also put in the most simplistic of terms. Happily, from their viewpoint, everybody else is wrong. Everybody. And almost invariably, the people are wrong, and not only wrong, but they are stupid, and not infrequently they're also evil. Rather curious identification of most of humanity, but there we go. And the thing which intrigues me most of all about these charmless people is that all of them, and I think this is true without exception, do not have within their bones a shred of humour. I don't think some of them laugh ever. So these are people who exist, and you can rest assured that they are indeed a threat to us all, wherever they come from, because of their ludicrously simplistic viewpoints. Now, some months ago I reviewed a book in the Times Literary Supplement by a chap called David Middell. I needn't detain ourselves on that. I didn't think it was a terribly good book, but in passing I mentioned that it seemed to me that Dan Dennett's famous description of Darwinism being a universal acid was somehow incoherent. Of course, if you think about it in a general sense, it's absurd from the first point. But more particularly, it's not clear to me how Darwinism itself could explain being a subject of the same universal acid to which everything else is subjected. Well, interestingly enough, and I've never met Dan Dennett, I'm afraid to say, but this provoked a response which was published in the TLS. And to put it in a nutshell, he said, well, this poor chap Conway Morris is a bit dim, and I quite agree with that. But you see, evolution explains evolution. At that point, I was somewhat taken aback, because it didn't seem to me that's much more clear than saying consciousness explains consciousness, or for that matter, black explains black, though G.K. Chesterton would then enjoy with an enormous mirth and entertainment that black almost then explains white, but that would be another story for another occasion. So I was ticked off very severely by this individual. But what I want to conclude with are simple things. First of all, obviously evolution is true, there's no doubt about that at all. But it's also utterly remarkable, and that's the reason why I'm so interested in it. And one clue to that is the almost complete failure of artificial intelligence and artificial life. We should be able to understand the general principles rather clearly, but in point of fact we don't. But that doesn't matter at all. That's why we do science. That's why we're interested in where things are and where they might be going. And most importantly, of course, we're dealing very much with unfinished business. And again, that's a good reason to be a scientist. And if any of you think there's simple problems to be solved, which Dan Dennett thinks he has, but nobody else seems to agree with him, then I just mention the word consciousness in one breath and then move very swiftly on. We haven't got a clue at the moment. So the story has a great deal more to go for it. Of course evolution is true, but I conclude simply by reminding you, and I don't think you need reminding because you're intelligent and you believe in evolution, that it's only part of a much larger truth. Thank you.
Steve.
Yes, thanks very much. Simon, in a way, set up the debate very nicely because, in a sense, he said all he was defending was evolution, which is a pretty empty term in terms of what it means. And Simon himself is someone who I think would be classified as a convergent rather than a divergent evolutionist in terms of I mean, Darwin himself, in terms of the way in which life develops and so forth, there's no particular end, there's no particular kind of, in a way, a priori constraint about how life can develop, but all of Simon's work seems to indicate that. But at the same time, he doesn't want to say he's a devotee of intelligent design, and I think that's a very interesting point. But at every turn he had an opportunity to say in his talk, he said there are certain things that evolution cannot explain. Well, why say that? Why say artificial life and artificial intelligence has been so much of a failure? A lot of people, in fact, especially in the Darwinist camp, who are evolutionists, in fact believe that, in fact, artificial life does demonstrate principles of natural selection just as easily as the stuff that's happened in the history of the Earth. Why make this kind of distinction? It seems to me that Simon is kind of hedging his bets here, maybe not quite speaking as openly and deliberately as he might, because he doesn't like the associations of intelligent design with creationism. Okay, so I think there's a little disingenuousness in the initial presentation, basically because evolution is treated so vaguely. Okay, and I think, sure, if we're talking about evolution, most intelligent design people would in fact be pro-evolution in this vague sense, which doesn't have any reference to Darwin. There's no difference between Darwin and Lamarck in any of the comments that Simon said. And I think that's quite interesting in a way, because the way in which this debate gets parsed is very rhetorical. So, for example, last year, in June of 2006, the Inter-Academy of Sciences, which is to say 69 versions of the National Academies of Science, basically said, you know, evolution is right, creationism is wrong, and again, very much like what the Council of Europe was saying. But if you look at the fine print, there's no particular commitment to the mechanisms of evolution or anything of that sort. I mean, the only real commitment is to the idea that the Earth wasn't created in 6 days. But beyond that point, hey, causal mechanisms are completely open. And in fact, the difference between intelligent design and the neo-Darwinist theory of evolution is on those points about causal mechanisms. And that's the thing in which all the people who defend evolution don't want to take a very strong stand on by saying it's primarily or mainly natural selection. Okay, and I noticed that that phrase didn't actually occur in anything Simon said. Okay? And so this is a very interesting kind of point here, right? That there's a kind of there's a sense in which part of the problem that we face here in the public sphere is that the debate is being rhetorically managed from both sides. And in particular, the people who are defending evolution want to claim an enormous amount of ground for themselves, right? So that at the end of the day, intelligent design looks kind of like just a sort of dressed up version of six-day creationism and nothing else besides that. And I think this is, in a way, very unfortunate. And I think this is very unfortunate, especially when we get to the level of science education, which is really, I think, sort of the issue that we ought to be discussing here. And that is in terms of motivating students for going into science. Okay? Because we're talking about the secondary school level, why should we be studying science? And science provides a unified understanding of reality, a comprehensive, rational understanding of reality. Okay? Why do we even think reality has this kind of unity or comprehensive rationality? Why do we even think this? Why don't we just think that every different mode of experience has its own relatively local explanation that perhaps can give us some sort of local kind of advantage, reproductively or otherwise? Why do we think there's this larger overarching picture that in fact requires that we go into abstract mathematics, we go into forms of inquiry that are quite alien to ordinary modes of understanding? Why do we do this? Why do we engage in this kind of activity? Well, the historic answer is because people have thought there is actually a divine plan, right? That in a sense, we as human beings, above all other animals, have a certain kind of privilege in terms of being able to fathom because of the way we were created. I'm not saying I personally believe this story, but that's so far the best answer that's been offered for why we actually justify science in those terms. Now, if you want to justify science as just the pursuit of technology or economic advantage or something like that, sure, fine. But then we wouldn't necessarily be treating very abstract forms of science. We wouldn't necessarily be talking about Newton as the greatest scientist to ever live or anything of that sort. We'd be talking a totally different story here. Okay. And so I think one has to be really careful here in terms of why are we motivating people to do science? What is it exactly that we want them to do? Okay, and I think at the moment, if we follow the American example, and it's very intriguing, in this bunch of people who are normally so suspicious of just following trends and everything, the ease with which we Americanize this kind of discussion. The American Constitution has a strict separation of church and state that's been interpreted in a very conservative fashion, so as in fact to disallow religious motivation from teaching science. But here we live in a country, right, that actually has an established church that's been very liberal, in terms of allowing all kinds of things. There's no reason to think that there has to be this radical split between science and religion in this country. There's certainly no legal reason for thinking that this is a kind of starting point for a serious discussion about this matter. And I think in this sense that, we in this country can regain the discussion. Okay, and we can start to put it on new terms. And at the end of the day, if we're talking about science education, we're talking about why should students study science? And a lot of people who are religiously motivated and interested in a sort of unified conception of reality, right, will see science as a vehicle to realize that, as Newton himself did, and as so many other people in the history of science did. And there's no reason why those people should be discouraged. And it's on those grounds that I think that something like intelligent design ought to be supported. But my proviso is, at the end of the day, it has to depend on the actual textbooks and curricula on offer. And that's how this dispute ought to be decided, okay? Not in terms of just the general vague ideas, but in terms of what's actually being offered in the curriculum, and are they properly scientific? And I say that having participated in the Dover trial, because there the textbook on offer was, in fact, a very poor textbook. And I never said anything good about it, okay? But there are good textbooks that can be had. Sorry about that.
Right. I'm just going to step back from the argument slightly on the table, because I think it'll be clear that there is an argument, and just make a couple of points about how we should look at the issue of creationism and the perceived threat it presents to science and teaching science in schools. I just really want to make 2 points, and the first is that creation is an empty threat to science. It doesn't really pose much of a problem. And the second point I want to make is that in the name of encouraging questioning of science in science education, recent reforms have encouraged a cynicism about science and evolution in particular. The one way I can do this is sort of look at the problem of how strong is the threat posed by the intelligent design movement as the current version of creationism is apparent at the moment. I mean, should we be really scared that our schools and universities are going to be overrun by evangelists dictating how science is taught? Truth in Science, a recent campaign which has put very slick information packs into every secondary school in the country, and they're explicitly anti-evolution campaigning group backed by the ID movement in the US. I mean, should we be worried about that? Basically, I don't think so, because hardly anybody's going to listen to them. And put it another way, be as clear as I can, I'm just not scared of the God Squad. And I don't think I'm any more scared today of them than I was when I was 12, when I went to a biblical meeting in a tent in a field where a not very convincing preacher tried to convince me that evolution was wrong and the Bible had a better answer. In the same way, my wife left the Girl Guides after listening to the hell and damnation preaching of a local Sunday school vicar. We get our ideas about religion and science and meaning from many sources, and even at a young age we're capable of dealing with that. I mean, if you don't believe me, we could go on about the arguments put forward by young Earth creationists that the Earth is 6,000 years old, the Great Flood wiped out the dinosaurs in 300 days, neatly ordering their bones in a systematic fashion and fossilising them in 2 years. Not to mention that Noah's Ark was as big as a modern-day aircraft carrier, and yes, they did take whales on board, but only babies. I mean, I could go on, but there's no point, because you either want to believe in creationism or you don't. The facts are immaterial. I think that's quite pertinent to some of the things that Steve said. So what is the panic about teaching creationism about? It can't be about the explanatory ideas, the explanatory power of their ideas, and it doesn't seem to make sense that even it's about them brainwashing small children. I think really the threat has been posed is that something's going on in America that if it comes over here will somehow sweep away reason before us and leave us exposed. But if you look at the history of the creationist campaigns in the US, in fact, the thing that's true about them is they've consistently failed to take a hold, even in the so-called Bible Belt of the South. I mean, the trajectory of the creationist argument has been a consistent retreat before science and an attempt to evolve a form of argument that can survive critical scrutiny. But the evolution of creationism means adapting to the power of scientific and secular environment in which it survives, so much so that modern-day creationists barely resemble their religious ancestors. You can look at something like the Scopes trial, where it's been mentioned, the protagonist trying to get rid of evolution from schools just basically said the Bible should be literally taken word for word. He was humiliated and basically destroyed in the trial, and the campaign failed to introduce that legislation. More recently, the intelligent design movement was formed from the ashes of the defeat of the Creationism Act in Louisiana in 1987, which wanted creationism taught alongside evolution. It was designed as a movement which basically tried to make a strategy out of its failure and said that instead of taking the Bible literally, you look for weaknesses in the arguments for evolution and exploit these in order to posit a scientific case for divine intelligence, so-called wedge strategy. But, however you understand it, and we can look at the case for or against the evidence that the intelligent design movement puts forward, and I don't think it stands up very well at all. What's happened is that you've seen creationism being backed into a corner, so much so that in the 2005 judgment in Dover, the ID movement was basically told that it was out of court, that ID is now not a science, it's a religious argument, and as Steve said, in a US state legislation, that's disallowed as they have a secular constitution. So, I mean, there's nowhere for creationism to go. You can't even conceive that over the past 80 years they've got anywhere else they can concede a point to make their case. So, what then is going on here? Why are we overreacting? Why is the government putting out statements saying that creationism, intelligent design should not be taught in science lessons, etc., as if it's the threat that people perceive it to be? Well, personally, I think that if you take a look at what the government's doing in terms of science education in this country, it's encouraging a questioning of modern science in the way that they've redesigned the curriculum. In fact, that very idea has allowed in the arguments that the ID movement have been trying to insist on in the US for the last 80 years. And so you have the situation where exam boards over here inadvertently last year said that you should put up alternatives to evolution, like intelligent design. And basically, they did the job for the ID movement. But if you look at it another way, very simply, evolution and its alternatives are already mainstream in British education. And basically, in RE syllabus, those things are taught in every school in this country. So we have already lost the idea that we teach evolution as the only truth. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dave. Right, I'm sure you'll all have lots of questions, so I'd like to go straight out to you. So if I could see hands, please. And have we got mics? Okay, great. Okay, we'll start at the back. Just two hands, right, sort of in the middle. The person with the mic, and then she'll pass it back.
I have a question. Since the beginning of time, human beings have been religious or spiritual. Not all of them, but quite a lot anyway. Is it possible that spirituality has an evolutionary purpose? I.e., could there be a spiritual gene?
Pass it behind you, please.
I I was just wondering whether there's some kind of wider principle at stake here also, beyond whether or not we should teach intelligent design. If we allow that, is there any kind of principle that if people lobby, if there's a big enough lobby for any particular topic, that somehow that ought to be allowed into schools? Should we be teaching astrology, say, or should we be teaching about, sort of Wilhelm Reich's notion of orgone energy? All of these things either already falsified or unfalsifiable. I just sort of wonder, where it might end.
Thank you. Any more? Right in front, right next to you. Yeah.
A genuine question about a debate I haven't taken much interest in. I like to look at these big debates from a political point of view. You haven't really said very much what is the political aim of the creationists, or don't they have any, or are they linked to any political aims? Perhaps that might help to judge us.
Okay, I'd like to take a couple of responses and then I'll come back out. Simon.
Is there a spiritual gene? No, there's not. That's easily dealt with. Not that I've seen in any case. There's spirituality, that's a different point. What about philosophy and orgone boxes and addict site, which I got very interested in as a teenager? They work, by the way, that's another story. You just have to remember two things. First of all, the fate of Socrates. He was asking questions which were not popular at the time. More importantly, most of the people who at least come to Cambridge to do philosophy think they're going to learn how to sort themselves out. They are deeply mistaken. They've been taught how to think, in particular. And finally, is there a political agenda to it? Well, again, back to Socrates. Everything is political in one sense. Somebody once said we're a political animal, but I think most people misunderstood what the person involved actually meant. But nevertheless, we live in a real world.
Steve, would you like to comment on something?
Yeah, first of all, with regard to the spiritual gene, there may or may not be. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if some Darwinists say there is, but the point is that wouldn't be sufficient for doing science. So the point is, it's not just that there's a spiritual reality, but there's some reason why we should be spending a lot of time investing the effort that we do that normally gets called science. And that's the thing that's really a contestation here, okay? The connection between, as it were, the spirituality and the work on science. The second point about the principle, could we be teaching anything else besides ID? I think the point here is that, in fact, intelligent design from a historical standpoint, in terms of the rise of science, has, in fact, motivated and has led to very successful science. And I think that's a criteria I would use. And in that respect, I think, if you had the right textbook, and again, this is where actually looking at textbooks and curricula become very important, talking about the history of physics through the history of theology would not be a bad idea. Okay? But what I would rule out of court is all the stupidity about the flying spaghetti monster that a lot of the more ignorant Darwinists come up with, which has no basis in history and has had no motivational force in science that even people who are not religious believe in today. Okay? So that would be my criteria. Now, with regard to the political aim of the debate, it's already been alluded to. It is true that I'm a person of the left. I'm aligning myself with intelligent design. The people who've been funding intelligent design, and a lot of the people on the ground level who've been supporting it, have been religious fundamentalists and people of the religious right. What worries me, and there is this wedge document, which in fact is a kind of communist-style conspiracy manifesto for how to turn America into this kind of Christian republic once and for all. Okay, all that is true. But if one looks at the origins of Darwinism prior to the time that it became institutionalized in academia, you will find a lot of racists, you'll find a lot of capitalists, a lot of people outside of the academic establishment who are in fact supporting it. Okay, so the point is, there's political dirty hands all around in this sort of issue. Okay, so that's not a problem. And I think at the end of the day, it just depends on to what extent other people who are interested in sort of the scientific and intellectual sides of the issue can disentangle these kinds of interests and the cognitive content of what's being discussed here. And that will eventually determine whether the movement can be taken forward in something like in case of intelligent design. I mean, it certainly worked in the case of Darwinism.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Dave, would you like to come back on some of that?
The thing that confuses me about Steve's position is I'm really not sure whether he actually believes in intelligent design or it's just a device to encourage debate and open up an argument about the position of science in society. And I wish he'd just make it clear.
Do you want me to make it clear?
Because I'd tell you why. I'll tell you why, and then you can come back if you like. But I mean, because I think it'd be very confusing for anyone listening to you to think that you actually believe in what you're saying. And therefore, the kind of cynicism of this actually is what really frustrates me about the way in which an attempt to open up the idea of critical thinking in science education is leading to cynicism amongst young people. In other words,
here's my cynicism. My cynicism is to think that this very high-level, large-scale, metaphysical debate actually matters with regard to the teaching of how to do science in a day-to-day brass tacks level. There's a sense in which you can hold either extreme view on this debate and still be able to do science perfectly well, and most science that's in fact taught in secondary schools doesn't even require any kind of reference to evolution or intelligent design or creationism or anything of that sort, okay? So, but the point is, and in a sense, a scientist shouldn't have to, as it were, be a kind of true believer in one or the other theory, okay? They should sort of see these theories in principle as resources that one could use to inform one's empirical work. And there's no particular reason why science has to have just sort of one dominant or pseudo-dominant, since we have to be kind of strategically vague when we talk about evolution to be able to encompass all of the scientific community, that has to inform scientific research. Okay, so I'm cynical about that, okay? If I'm cynical about anything, is the idea that science needs a dominant theoretical position from which to operate in order to do sensible empirical research. And one of the ways you can see this, and I've done a sort of a citation search on this, is how often does the word evolution even appear in abstracts in biology articles, okay? At most, the highest figure you can give is like 14-15%, okay? And there, evolution can mean anything from a very technical sense of natural selection to just a very vague sense that things develop, okay? And so from that standpoint, there's a serious issue here, but it's an issue of metaphysical, of cultural, of political import, but I doubt that the implications really would affect the way in which you do science on a day-to-day level in the laboratory. In that sense, the issue should be open.
Okay, thanks, Steve. There's lots of questions now. There were two hands over at the left. There's a hand up there earlier. Yeah, just there.
My question relates to the context of this debate. Secondary schools in Nottingham, if you want to do the 3 sciences at GCSE level, you have to go to a church school or a private school. And the context in terms of the relativizing of science, and that's why I'm nervous of this idea of a sort of theories are just resources, a sort of pick and mix approach, because a threat to a scientific approach is from the beauty therapy courses, that if you go to the City Academy, which is will be my children's nearest school, that's where they won't be doing the 3 sciences. They'll be offered one science course alongside beauty therapy, etc., etc.
There's a question. Someone sitting on the floor just there.
I've forgotten the name of the guy in the red shirt. I'm very sorry.
Steve Fuller.
Steve. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I kind of think that you're conflating a lot of different concepts here. Firstly,
I'm sure you do.
There's a big difference between current scientific thinking and history of science. And the history of science is interesting. It's really important. It's a thing that I think we should study. But I don't think that you can teach, say, the idea of spontaneous generation of flies in rotting meat as a scientific idea that's still valid. But it's
a version of it still is. Sorry.
It's an interesting way to look at how science has developed over time. And I also think you're conflating religious ideas with scientific ideas.
Yeah, as if they're different.
If you look at the empirical evidence and come up with a theory that fits the evidence, that's a scientific theory,
right.
And it is falsifiable.
Right.
And
is
if you find evidence,
if
you find evidence that goes against it, or you find a theory that fits it better, then you can adopt it.
Right.
So you can't be a true believer in evolution in the way that you can be a true believer in God. You simply follow the scientific argument. One last thing. I'm also slightly concerned with the way that you talk about doing science, as if all scientists do is sit in a laboratory and physically move one petri dish to another side.
Well, I don't know what people are worried about, frankly.
Science is an academic subject. If you're doing scientific research, you're looking at the empirical facts and the empirical data to come up with a theory to explain the world.
Sure, of course.
So the theory that you choose is important.
I don't know what's going on here. This is ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
We'll come back.
I don't disagree with you.
I'll take a couple more questions. This one right there, and then we'll come to the road just there.
I do believe Charles Darwin summed up perfectly the evolution of the physical form. But and this really relates to Steve. Don't you believe that religion and science can merge in that religion understood in its proper context, and the correct relationship between the esoteric side of religion, like the spiritual side? Like, the Bible is not to be interpreted literally. Anyone who does is limited in their view. But do you believe that the Bible interpreted spiritually and esoterically hidden knowledge can merge with science? And also, the lady talking about the spiritual gene, I think she phrased it wrong. She was really talking about the soul. The soul is divine, and that's in all of us.
Okay, there's 3 questions right along that road just behind. Yeah.
Actually, I thought, what's his name? Steve Fuller. Yeah, I thought made it.
I should wear a name tag.
Did raise quite an important question within science, which is the issue about whether it's fine to just have different modes of explanation for different modes of experience. Because I think there is an alternative danger, which maybe is far more worrying than the danger coming from anti-Darwinists, which is the danger of importing one methodology that works in one area into a completely separate sphere of experience. Which the example I'm thinking of is evolutionary psychology, which attempts to wholesale take the concepts of Darwinism over into social sciences. And I think that leads to a danger of enthusiasm for science, which is underpinned by a cynicism about human beings. So I just wondered if people could comment on that.
Could you just pass the mic along to someone right.
I think that something really very dangerous is implicit in all this, and that is that really in the last 100 years we've lost complete faith in ourselves and therefore in our rational endeavor to understand things, and that, you know, it's the Titanic sinking that's kind of the image of the 20th century. So we've lost faith that science can solve anything just at the moment that we need to believe most that it can. And we need to believe most in just our own capacity without any other outside force. It's within ourselves that we need to believe. Just as in the sort of the beginning of the Renaissance, they began to think that man, could solve and think things through. And somehow, in all of this, it's a reaction that people want something simple, they want something safe, they want to put it somewhere else, they want to take the responsibility outside of themselves and outside of the realm of rationality to solve it. So to me, that's what's frightening, is that actually science has to be twice as rational, twice as intelligent, and really solve our problems, and we really have to believe in it because it's all we have. And the rest of it, if there's God or if there's anything else, if there's spirituality, if there's our soul, it will solve itself. But the only thing that's going to solve us is to, do science.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to the panel, and then I know there's lots more questions, so we'll come up for another round. Steve, you've been dying to get in.
Okay, you want me to start? Okay, because I thought you were going to go in the normal order. But first of all, the first point I want to make is in terms of how you demarcate what's actually taught and not taught, to go back to your question. It seems to me this is where people in my own field, history, philosophy, and sociology of science, need to have a little moral courage and intervene in the discussion, because there are historical reasons for thinking that certain forms of thought throughout history have in fact been quite generative of science, that even people not holding the initial metaphysical assumptions have found useful. Okay? And it seems to me that this is where people in my field ought to be taking a more active role. And I'm sorry to say that at this point this hasn't really happened very much. The second point, and this relates to the point about history of science versus contemporary science. This is a bogus distinction, because if you're talking about contemporary science, you're implying a sort of sense of how the history has developed, right? The idea of track record, for example, okay? And that involves figuring out which cases support which theory. That's in the back of your mind whenever you talk about there being a dominant scientific theory at a given time. So you're already presupposing a certain notion of the history of science. And I think the point is we might as well make it explicit in the curriculum as early as possible that in fact that the history of science is constructed in a certain way where certain cases are mobilized to make it look like it supports a certain theory, where in fact it could be supporting an alternative theory. And often the people who came up with the cases held the alternative theory, okay? As in the case of Gregor Mendel, who was an Augustinian monk who founded modern genetics. I mean, you know, one could go on and on and on. And now, in terms of this business of religion versus science, frankly, historically, this is not a strong distinction in terms of intellectual matters. It is a strong distinction in terms of institutional matters, especially once you start to get science secularized and made part of the university curriculum, and there's an active kind of sort of conflict between science and religion in terms of control of the university and then control of the school curriculum. But prior to the late 19th century, prior to Darwin's own work, the people who were most likely to be pursuing science were themselves people who had some affiliation with some sort of church group, okay? So, and that was in fact what motivated them. And I think at the end of the day, that's the issue here. Motivating people to do science in the grand, large sense that we think is the exemplar of rationality in our society today. And it's on those grounds where religion can be influential.
Okay, Simon, would you like to come back on any of that?
Well, welcome to planet Earth, as they say. Yeah, quite so. It's a huge area which has been alluded to, but in essence, of course there are alternative theories. Of course we can be wrong, but by and large we go towards ones which are never correct, but often are startlingly good in particular contexts which apply across the universe, so far as we know. In the case of Darwinism, all one is saying is that there is a method by which life evolves. It's no more interesting or less interesting than ionic bonding. It is simply the way the world works. If you want to persuade people why science is worth doing, we do it because we're ignorant. We don't do it because we know things. Of course, each thing which we do in 50 years' time will look completely out of date. That is in the nature of the science. But nevertheless, there's a cumulative increase in knowledge which indicates, in my view, that in point of fact what we know at the moment is almost nothing, but rather than regarding it as a set of alternatives which can be put in any set of contexts and are equivalent, they're nothing of the sort. We have something here which may startle us beyond belief, and that's why we do it.
I'm kind of follow on from that very clearly. I think Steve's point is that he's trying to make a case that the idea of science is not one that we should accept and that we should break it down, and you know, sociology should have a say in that, and that's fair enough. That's his argument. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at the way that science has developed and the science of evolution, it's not just stuck with Darwinian evolution. There's a thing called the new synthesis. It's completely moved on. It's moved on as we found out how to use it and how to try and understand more complicated problems. That's the point. We do science and we increase our understanding of the natural world. However, this argument is not about that. This argument is about trying to intervene in the curriculum in such a way that instead of teaching academic science to young people at an early age and giving them a basis upon which to understand the natural world, we think that it's better to give them a critical appraisal of the claims that science makes. And that means to say that when young people up to the age of 16 deal with something like evolution, they are not going to deal with evolution. They are going to deal with the arguments surrounding its contentious nature in society. And how can they make a judgment on it? And so in actual fact, what we are doing is, if we accept the path that Steve's putting forward, is not making more critically aware young people. We're making cynical young people who won't have a reason for believing in science and won't have a way, a framework for standing on any issue. And so it wouldn't be surprised then if things like ID and creationism were gained in popularity as a kind of backlash to the domination of a set of ideas that Steve thinks are not very good.
Okay, I'd like to come up for one more round of questions. We're overrunning, so please keep these quick. There's someone up there right in the back in the middle in the green jumper. And then there was another one right down here. No, just down here. Sorry.
Hello. Okay. I was listening to you all, I'm a teacher myself. It seems that you're all kind of expressing the way you've put yourself forward today what's going on. Steve's, to me, you really don't respond, okay, let me finish here. You're all over the place. You sound a bit like the government. It sounds kind of exciting, dramatic. You want to talk about these new ideas. But if I was a kid trying to understand what you're talking about, I'd find it really hard.
I'd rely on you.
Thank you. I'll take that responsibility. I need to. But Simon seems a bit, 19th century, because you don't seem like you're that bothered. So but you're...
He's at Cambridge. He doesn't have to be bothered.
No, but...
You would be surprised.
Okay. Well, the thing is, in a way, that sums up what I'm saying as well, because you're at the top end of this. You're leading the field, and I wonder how that affects things lower down in the schools. And although the boring school teacher's there in his tie, he's really, and you two are looking quite trendy. He's quite calmly made the case for science. I presume physics, chemistry, and biology. And I've got to say, it speaks for itself. I'd follow that and then make my own mind up.
Okay, there's a question right here. Please keep your questions concise because we're running out of time.
I'll try and be short, but first of all, why are kids interested in science? Because they are naturally inquisitive, and we should encourage them in that. Why do we go to abstractions? Because that's the best way of dealing with these questions. Should we teach about artificial intelligent design? To some extent, yes, but in its proper place and with a proper critical approach to it. Rather interestingly, we've been concentrating on the threat from intelligent design and creationism to science. But what about the other way around? A latest CD from the BBC, in which the exponent of biblical teaching in RE by we have Terence Copley, who's just been appointed.
Can you please speak into the mic?
We have Terence Copley, who's just been.
Can you please speak directly into the microphone, please?
Sorry?
Can you speak directly into the microphone, please?
Okay. Okay, now?
Can we get you...
He is speaking in the mic.
This is on.
Yeah.
Right, can you hear me now? Yes. Right, okay. Terence Copley, who's just been appointed Professor of RE at Oxford University and is an exponent of biblical texts in RE, is encouraging the teaching of humanism in RE and also evolution in RE. Now, as long as we've got the thing properly set up, fine. But I don't think that Steve is doing any more than muddy the water and confusing a great number of people in this.
Okay, there's a question just here. Yeah, if you could pass the mic right in front of you. If that doesn't work, could you come around with the other microphone, please?
Thank you. Actually, is this working?
No, I don't think so. Could you pass the other mic?
How many?
That's a technical term, stand up, right? Yeah, stand up. Yes, I find it very interesting, the notion that you should teach intelligent design along with evolution as comparable. It's like comparing an ox cart to a jumbo jet, basically, and regarding them as a way of training pilots. But I think the real reason why you feel...
No, but go ahead.
Hang on. Belt up a moment, I haven't finished. Basically, I think the real reason why you want to relativize the comparative truth claims, the comparative truth claims of intelligent design, which has very little going for it, and evolution, which has an awful lot going for it, is a bitterness that comes from sociologists that their own science is so
talk to the hand
wait a minute. That their own science is so cognitively primitive that they really have to...
Talk to the head, guy. You don't know what you're talking about.
I think I've made my point. Yeah.
Right. We have time for only 2 more questions, and then I'm going to let the speaker sum up. So there's one right there with the microphone. Yeah, go ahead. You. And then there's one more at the back over there.
Essentially, my is more or less a kind of point rather than a question. Is to Steve his idea that you will teach science better by teaching this kind of controversy. Not true, I'm afraid. Evolution is inherently tied up within biology. There is absolutely no way you can understand anything in biology without the context of evolution. You take why do the rickettsial bacteria have small genomes? If you don't understand the evolutionary context of there being intracellular parasites or whatever, it doesn't make sense. It's an arbitrary fact. Same with, I don't know, off the top of my head, embryology. Embryology is a list of arbitrary facts without the context of evolution to make it a coherent set of ideas. So I think that you merely confuse people and turn it into a boring set of rote learning without the structure that evolution gives to it.
All right, final question just at the top, and then we're going to have to come back to the speakers and finish off.
Hi, Steve. First of all, creation science, as it used to be in America, failed to make any inroads into the science curriculum in America, not because it was religious, but because it wasn't science, because it failed to measure up to the requirements of science.
That's right.
And it didn't come by way of any sort of twisted notion of the history of science, and it didn't come by way of a failure to acknowledge Christianity for having given us the gift of science.
That's right.
It failed because it wasn't science.
Exactly.
ID fails for the same reasons. It's not science. If there is any controversy,
I disagree.
If there is any controversy, the controversy is whether or not it plays by the same rules, whether or not it measures up to the requirements of science. And that controversy has to be fought out long before it gets anywhere near the university, long before it gets anywhere near a lab. And it's in the lab where the controversy, if there is any scientific controversy, should be sorted out before it gets anywhere near the classroom.
Okay, we have to come back to the speakers and finish off. In the order in which you spoke, you have a minute and a half, and that's it.
I'll have even less than that, I hope. Thank you very much, all of you, for your comments and so forth. It's a very difficult area to even grapple with on a good day, let alone a Sunday. The point the speaker there made in the blue shirt about the reduction in the genome size of the bacteria, which is a bit technical, in point of fact touches on a very important principle, which you're probably well aware of, but is not otherwise well known, is actually when bacteria do that in different sorts of contexts, not only when they go through your gut and lead to major hemorrhaging, but in many other contexts, they follow the same rules again and again. That's not so widely appreciated in biology. It turns out that biology is actually, at long last, going to turn into a science. That is, it will turn into something which is predictable. And that's the only thing we're really asking of science. And I think I'll stop right there.
Steve.
I think the only sense in which evolution provides the only obvious explanation in the sense that you were talking about is if you take a very sort of adaptationist view of evolution. That is to say that there's some sense in which organisms are naturally fitted to their environment. But that sense of adaptationism is in fact the sense of evolution that in fact was lifted from the intelligent design perspective, but removing God from the picture, okay? And that other senses of evolution, I think, actually don't fit so comfortably necessarily with the kind of stuff that's routinely taught in biology. And I don't understand the comment that somehow this debate, which is a metaphysical debate at the end of the day, is going to be resolved by stuff that's happening in the laboratory. I think in a sense that's been a very much a strategic mistake that the intelligent design movement has made with regard to pitching its claims, because it's going to be very difficult to just look at a particular experiment and somehow think that this kind of large-scale discussion is going to be resolved just on the basis of what happens in the experiment, okay? Because there's a lot more in terms of assumptions and so forth that are packed into it. And that's why that's grounds for actually teaching the debate. Because in a sense, you can talk about this as a debate about the ultimate point of doing science, removed from what actually happens in the laboratory, because what happens in the laboratory, that has its own conclusion, and you can explain it either way. But the point is, what's the difference between explaining it either way?
All right, thank you. Thank you. Dave, finish this off, please.
Yeah, right. Just in terms of Steve's critique, just very quickly, Steve rejects the scientific method.
No.
I think that's quite clear. You reject experimental science. You don't think that's the way to learn from things. No. And that's a particular viewpoint.
No.
And if anyone wants to go back into the science wars arguments that were had in the 80s and so on, Steve was a proponent in one side of that, then we can do that. But it's not going to happen here. But in terms of intelligent design, Steve keeps going on about this, but he's not really said anything of what the evidence for intelligent design is. Neither has he put that on the table in terms of a critical appraisal of it. If you want to read a really good essay, Mark Perrack essay, Beyond Suboptimality, on talk reason, it's really, really good. It takes it apart, not in terms of the science, but in terms of the proposition itself. Irreducible complexity does not make sense and is not an argument for a divine intervention, a designer. It's actually an argument for a bad design, right? So it doesn't stand up in any terms whatsoever, ID. The point here is that what we're trying to do is say that teaching science is something that is in contention. It is. It is because people are losing their way in terms of how they understand science, what kind of perspective they have on its importance to us and so forth. And this is a cipher for that erosion of our faith in science. And I think that if you understand it that way, you'll get more out of it.
Okay, before we thank our speakers, just a couple of very quick announcements. I'd like to thank the Institute of Ideas Education Forum and the Science and Health Forum for sponsoring this debate. If you're trying to escape the crowds, head to the Student Union Cafe upstairs. And don't forget to check out the exhibition, Should Art Change the World? A couple of debates you may be interested later today. Starting here right after this is the Battle for Science strand. And also starting in February, the Institute of Ideas and Bishopsgate Secularism 2008 series. Can we thank our speakers?